So up until now, we've been digging into how democracy works, both inside a country and on the world stage. But now, we're going to tackle a really tricky new question. You see, recently, a lot of powerful countries, especially the USA, have taken on this mission of democracy promotion. And they argue that, just talking about democratic values isn't always enough. Sometimes, they say, existing democracies need to step in and intervene in non-democratic countries to help establish it there. And get this, in some cases, they've even launched armed attacks to make it happen. So that forces us to ask a really fundamental question. Is it ever right to force democracy on another nation? That's what we're going to explore today. And to do that, we need to look at a real-world example. To really get to the heart of this whole debate, we're going to dive into one of the most controversial examples of this idea in action, the story of modern Iraq. And believe me, it's a story that will make us confront some seriously difficult questions about power, freedom, and what it really means to help. Okay, so let's set the stage. Starting in 1979, Iraq was under the rule of Saddam Hussein and his Ba'ath Party. And his leadership was, well, it was a total contradiction. On one hand, his government did some things that were surprisingly progressive, like giving women the right to vote, a big deal in that region at the time. But on the other hand, he ran a brutal dictatorship. Dissent was completely crushed, and his political rivals were often killed.
This brings us to the year 2003. The United States and its allies, including the United Kingdom, made a world-shaking claim. They said that Iraq was hiding secret weapons of mass destruction, you might have heard the term WMDs, and that these weapons were a major threat to the entire world. And that right there became the official reason for invading the country.
But here's where the whole story takes a massive twist. Before the invasion, a team from the United Nations went into Iraq to search for these weapons, and they came up with nothing. They didn't find any. And it doesn't stop there. The war itself was never actually authorized by the UN Security Council. In fact, the UN Secretary General at the time, a man named Kofi Annan, flat out called the invasion illegal. So the really crucial thing to understand here is that this intervention went ahead without the UN's blessing and was based on a claim that was never actually proven. So what happened right after the invasion? Well, Saddam Hussein was removed from power, for sure. But what came next wasn't a government chosen by the Iraqi people. Instead, the US installed a temporary government that it preferred. And that right there raises a huge question about what kind of democracy was actually being built. Okay, so that's the official story, the timeline of events. But how did people around the world feel about all this as it was happening? Well, one of the best ways to get a sense of the public mood is to look at political cartoons. They're like these little snapshots of history, showing us what people were thinking and critiquing at the time. Just look at this cartoon from 2004. It's called Cactus of Democracy. What we see is a US soldier in full combat gear handing a plant to an Iraqi civilian who looks like he's in pain. But it's not a peace lily or an olive branch. It's a cactus, and it's shaped exactly like the Statue of Liberty. It's supposed to be a gift, but it's a painful, prickly one. Let's just pause on that for a second. Who is giving this gift? And who is receiving it? What's the real message here? It seems pretty clear, right? The cartoonist is suggesting that this version of liberty, delivered by military force, isn't some wonderful present. It's actually a painful burden.
Now let's check out a second cartoon from around that same time. This one's titled Helping Democracy. At first, you see what looks like an election. There's a ballot box, but then you look closer. There's this huge soldier literally forcing a much smaller civilian to put a ballot in the box. The person isn't choosing to vote, they're being moved like a puppet.
And this just makes you ask, doesn't it? Does this look anything like a free election? The title says Helping Democracy, but the picture is all about force and control. It really makes you think, can this idea of forced help be applied to other situations where powerful countries step in, claiming they're bringing freedom? So the story of Iraq, and the way these cartoonists saw it, brings us right back to our big debate. It raises these huge, fundamental questions that we all really need to grapple with when we talk about foreign intervention and the spread of democracy.
Yeah, the case of Iraq doesn't give us any easy answers at all. Instead, it leaves us with some really heavy questions to think about. Like, is waging a war the right way to promote democracy? Can democracy really take hold if it's being pushed from the outside, without the local people leading the charge? Even if you can establish a democracy by force, is it actually going to last? And maybe the biggest question of all, Isn't using external force to give people democracy kind of against the whole spirit of democracy in the first place?
Before we wrap this up, let's just quickly go over some key terms. Think of it as a glossary for global politics. Honestly, having this vocabulary in your back pocket makes it so much easier to understand and discuss these super complex events with a bit more clarity.
Okay, let's run through these real quick. We've got censorship, which is when a government restricts what people can say or see. A coalition, which is just an alliance, like the group of countries that invaded Iraq. A coup is a sudden, illegal takeover of a government. Martial law is when the military takes control, replacing normal laws. A referendum is a direct vote where everyone gets to say yes or no on a big issue. And finally, veto, which literally means I forbid. It's the power to block a decision, a really important power at the UN. Ultimately, the story of Iraq really shows us that there are no simple answers here. The goal of spreading democracy might be a noble one, but the how you do it, remains one of the toughest debates in the world today. It leaves us with that lingering question: when does helping become forcing? And that's a question we're all still trying to figure out.